Hello. And they do say that a week is a long time in politics. In this case, it's a whole less than 24 hours actually, that a new contender has stepped up to the plate to replace Nicola Sturgeon. I'm going back to this because it sort of encapsulates a lot of issues that you Americans who are watching this will also find very familiar. It seems to be a constant among leftward type governments and movements, and I'm using that word in both of its meanings, in politics, in democratic politics, in the Anglosphere at any rate. And it's the hash that Nicola Sturgeon made out of her governance of Scotland, which arose out of a nationalism that turned to using hatred of the other as a means of getting people together. In her case, it was a hatred of the English, although she said words that implied, that insisted she didn't hate the English. Nearly everything she did showed that she did. And she gave authority to people who wanted to hate somebody. That's the ability to do that as well. I have mentioned a couple of, a nasty incident that happened to me, and I know other people who have had nasty incidents happen to them in Scotland because they were English. And normally, even if they felt that way, they'd have controlled themselves. But because of the Sturgeon effect, they felt at liberty to act in the way that they did. Now, that's one thing. In places like California, it's hatred of Trump and MAGA Republicans, or whatever that means. And you get this, everything that's wrong is MAGA Republicans' fault. And you got all sorts of ridiculous stuff coming out of places like California and other democratic strongholds, as well as the rubbish they were talking about MAGA Republicans. They were also making a hash of their own societies. And it's the same thing as what happened in Scotland. The trouble with nationalism is that it does often tip over into a hatred of the other. That's a common enough thing. I mean, National Socialism, we all know what that led to, don't we? However, Nicola Sturgeon has stepped down, and she stepped down for a number of reasons. I saw this list here in the on one of my Twitter feeds, I suppose. So I'm going to just let you have a look at it, and you can make up your own minds. £20 million on Pretendi ref. Well, okay, that's the referendum. 5 million renovating 2 tower blocks. I don't know anything about that, but 5 million is rather a lot of money. 100 million to rent staff 2 cruise ships. I don't know what that means, but I'm assuming that's to do with SNP necessities. 9 million on foreign offices. Oh yes, because despite the fact that Scotland was not an independent state, Sturgeon had come up with the idea of having semi-official embassies or consulates in various places. 15 million on prisoner wages. Obviously, they're paying the prisoners more than they are in England, but I don't know about that. 3 million on mobile phones for prisoners. At that point, I think, probably not. 1.5 million on an election campaign. You're only supposed to have a certain budget for elections, so I don't know how that happened legally. 6.1 million spent on radio advertising during the pandemic. I think you could possibly make a case for that, but 6.1 does sound like rather a lot. 424 million spent on locum doctors. Now, I have mentioned in my previous video about Sturgeon stepping down that Scotland is depopulating. And one of the things that's happening, of course, is the brightest and the best are also the lightest on their feet. And doctors would be some of those. And it looks like there have been plenty, I don't know the figures, but if they've had to spend £424 million, I'm assuming that's over the past 20 years or so. I don't think it's per annum, but it's still a lot of money. And of course, the Scottish taxpayers are paying for this. Now, a locum doctor, just in case you aren't up to speed, in the National Health Service you have a regular doctor, and then when the regular doctor isn't there, has left or is on holiday or whatever, then a locum is employed, most likely from an agency, at double the fees, the fee of the doctor and the fee of the agency. So you may ask, how come they managed to tot up that sort of a bill? £18 million annually on expenses for the Parliament, I assume, but MSP, yeah, that's anybody there in the Parliament. 116 million annually to run Holyrood. Now, that really is a lot of money. You really don't need 116 million pounds to run a parliamentary facility for. Just a minute, I just want to check this. Population of Scotland. And I am Granniopteryx, interrupting myself to remind you that I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. I'm also on Twitter, Gab and Parler, where I am at Granniopteryx. I let you know on those platforms when I've uploaded a new video. Please like this video, please share it, and please subscribe. Check your subscription if you're on YouTube. They drop subscriptions all the time. You can also help me financially, buy me a coffee, or one of the other links below. All the links are in the description. Right, back to the SNP and its multiple failures. Population is 5,454,000, 5.5 million. Now, my maths is terrible, but so far as I can work out, and I'll have to delete this bit if I get it wrong, 116 million divided by about 5.5 million, that's about 20 times, isn't it? Goes into that about 20 times, which would mean that every single Scottish person is paying around £400 or £500 a year just to run Holyrood. That's a lot of money for a lot of people. They could use that money to heat their homes or go on holiday. They might even use that money to get their kids a decent education, because Scotland's education system is now in the toilet. It used to be fantastic. Everyone talked about the Scottish education. Not anymore, they don't. Okay, 30 million on Holyrood repairs. So that's not only the 116 million to run the place, it's 30 million to keep it in repair. How? They paid £500,000 to Stonewall. Stonewall is the charity that is pushing trans rights right now. There are so many charities that need help, and they are giving it, or they were giving it, to an organisation whose primary purpose now is to maim children. Okay, 23 million on repairs to the empty sick kids hospital. There was a Yes minister episode. And anybody, even if you haven't seen Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, of a comedy of the 80s, which turns out not to be so much of a comedy. It was when Jim Hacker, the Prime Minister, discovered there was a hospital that hadn't had any patients for... it had been built, and 5 years later or 10 years later, it still had no patients. And Sir Humphrey, his permanent secretary, was explaining that the hospital still had to pay doctors, bureaucrats, cleaners and all the rest of it to keep the hospital going, even though there were no patients. And it sounds a lot like that. 7 million on ministerial chauffeur-driven cars. Well, yeah, okay. I mean, that's a lot of money, but I don't know for how long. And yeah, ministerial, you'd have to break that down, because obviously ministers have to have chauffeur-driven cars. The point is, how many ministers were there and what did they use it for? Okay, 1.3 million on ministerial car trips. Again, I'd need to see the figures on that. Yeah, 1.2 million on electric cars for Holyrood staff. Okay. 25 million for 2,000 car charging points in Aberdeen. 25 million? I don't believe 2,000 car charging ports could cost that sort of money. That smacks to me of money and jobs for the boys, yeah? 30 million on a low carbon transport loan scheme. Yeah, well, I can imagine where the loans went to. £500,000 on a failed national energy company. What did you expect? Doesn't this sound a lot like California? Except without the sunshine. 110 million on 2 ferries. Right, these 2 ferries are rusting away. The company, hang on a minute, I've got some information about the Great Ferry disaster. Yeah, it's right here. I'll just bring this over. The ferry fiasco is a term that refers to an ongoing Scottish political controversy relating to the construction of 2 ferries. Now, what happened was the shipbuilding company went into administration. It was bought up by some businessman, and that's also, now you can see why they need ferries. These Scottish islands are part of Scotland. They are at a distance and they need good communications. They need good ferries. Apparently the ferries they have now are over 30 years old. And I did actually find something here. I wonder if, there we are. Further delays in 2022. In February 2022, at least 400 electrical cables installed aboard Glen Sannox were found to be too short to reach equipment. And that probably encapsulates the whole thing. It's been one disaster after the other. First of all, because the company is suspect in some way. And secondly, because this is what happens when the state goes into making things. The money just gets splashed around. And those the ferries are in dry dock. They're not finished. There doesn't seem to be any prospect of them being finished. And, well, yeah. All 400 electrical cables, at least, will have to be replaced. And when you replace cables, of course, it's not just a matter of buying a few lengths of wire, is it? You've got to start ripping things apart. Okay, so that was, where? £110 million. Absolutely wasted. And I want to say it's not only the Scottish taxpayer who's paying for this, because there's something called the Barnett formula. I'm not going to go into that right now, but you can look it up. And what it is money from England going to Scotland to help prop up the Scottish finances. And actually, most of that money is coming from London specifically, from London taxpayers and the London Stock Exchange, you know, the amount of money that generates. That's where the money's coming from. So Sturgeon felt she could just splash the money around because it wasn't just the Scottish taxpayers who were going to hurt over that. it was the English taxpayers as well. And maybe she had a certain joy in that. Look, there was, I've forgotten her name now, but there was one Scottish member of the Scottish Parliament, and she was in London to attend the British Parliament, and she got COVID while she was there. Knowing she had COVID, and this was at a time when everybody else was, keeping their distance. But even nowadays, if you know you've got COVID, you don't go out onto public transport, do you? She got out of the place she was staying. She got on a train to Scotland. A train. And so she went to the train station and she got on the train and she travelled all the way to Scotland, knowing she had a highly infectious disease. Now, you can't tell me that that wasn't in her heart a way of getting at English people, because that's most of the people she would have come across on her journey up to Scotland. I do believe that most sincerely, that she thought she could actually maim, hurt or incapacitate, or maybe even kill some English people on her way back home. That's what I think she was there at the back of her mind. Anyway, right, let's say 40 million on the Rangers case, don't know anything about that. 52 on Bifab, never heard of it. 586 million on Lochaber smelter, or Lochaber, sorry if I pronounced it wrongly, smelter. I don't know what it is, but it sounds like a steel company, maybe I'm wrong, and it sounds like it failed. 178 million on failed agricultural IT system, another failure. This is all grandiose schemes with no real backing, except the money of the taxpayer. 745 million on the A90. The original forecast was 395 million. I don't know where the A90 is, but that's double the price. Mind you, that happens a lot anyway. 30 million on failed energy company investment. The word failure turns up rather a lot here. 10 billion on failed Chinese consortium deal. Now, actually, I happen to know about that, and that's not, the money didn't go. It just didn't come. They were trying to get it coming. They were banking on that, on the finances, and it just didn't transpire. And 20 million on electric police cars that couldn't go because there weren't any charge points, despite the fact that Aberdeen, let's get back to Aberdeen, somewhere up here, I remembered, they spent 25 million for 2,000 car charging points just in Aberdeen. So if the police cars were chasing somebody in Aberdeen, they'd probably have been all right. Well, that's what I just want you to see the scope. Now, the Scottish taxpayer has been paying for this. The Scottish taxpayer has been voting for it. And I don't feel any envy for Ash Regan, who has stepped forward and might very well become the next leader of the Scottish National Party. She's got the right qualifications. She's a woman and she's got red hair. What more could a Scottish voter want? No, she has principles as well. She stepped down over the trans ideas, so she wasn't so wedded to her job and the money it got her. Obviously, many benefits, as we see from that list I showed before. She stepped down because she didn't like what this trans thing was doing. I want to point out this here is the old suffragette flag colours. Green, white and violet. It's not really that violet, but anyway, green, white and violet, which stood for Give Votes to women. And this has nothing to do with votes anymore, but it's become a sort of feminist, look, there's her scarf, a feminist logo. Well, I don't disapprove of that at all. The SNP lost a lot of members over this transgender thing. Now, I want to tell you that the Conservatives are probably heaving a sigh of relief at this lady stepping up, because she very well might invigorate the Scottish National Party. And the one thing I thought of when Sturgeon resigned was that there would be a non-entity, or somebody like Hamza Yousaf. What's the difference? I don't know. Anyway, some non-entity would step in, somebody that nobody knew about, and then the Scots would start voting Labour again, which would give the Labour Party a huge advantage in the British next general elections. So the Conservatives might be quite happy about that. What else do I have here? Yeah, oh, I didn't mention the drug deaths, did I? But yeah, okay, so that's the story about Scotland. Any Scots in Scotland can, correct me if I'm wrong. This has been a complete disaster. I'm afraid it's the Scottish fault. Even if you write in and say, well, I didn't vote for them, or I didn't want them, so many of your friends and relatives and colleagues and citizens of Scotland did vote for this person, this is what you got. And that's what happens with nationalism. Okay, I cut out a bit of advice. Scotland doesn't need my advice. And certainly, just as a matter of interest, the Scots are still not celebrating because we're doomed. Here, the final ending is that a Scottish council has rejected the bank holiday for the coronation of King Charles III in May. And they've decided, no, this is going to be a work day because we're going to show our independence by working. I wonder how many sickies they're going to get in various offices and businesses on that day. All right, well, yeah, just filling you in on the Scottish issue. No, so, well, there you are, just filling you in on Scotland. And again, as I say, if you're not from England, go on holiday there. It's a very pretty place. Till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm, or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com, and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.